This is one of the most fascinating, meaningful, fulfilling things that we can learn about our true nature and who we really are. I think there is a way more intelligent, expanded part of ourselves that we have access to all the time that is there to navigate life on a deeply intuitive level if we want it. The thing you hear all the time is, I've never told anybody this. It's a thing you hear the most. People are wanting to talk about this.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Watch Mojo's Unveiled podcast. I'm your host, Rob. And before we jump into today's episode, I'd just like to remind you that Unveiled is now available on all podcast platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and many others. So if you're watching this on YouTube, hit the link in the description of the video to head over there, follow the show. It really helps to support us. And if you're listening on any of those audio platforms, why not leave us a rating and a review? That also helps support the show and make sure that we are able to continue bringing you top quality guests. With that out of the way, today's guest is Tracey Dolan. She is a remote viewer, a close encounter researcher, and lecturer, and she explores the mind, anomalous experiences, consciousness, and lots more with her research and lectures. And she joins me today to talk about all of that and much more. Tracey, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
So you recently participated in a film called Psychics and the Phenomenon by documentarian Darcy Weir. That was very interesting. I got a chance to watch that, and I have no shortage of notes on the film. There was a wealth of information about remote viewing and a lot more. But just to set things up for the audience, can you give us a little bit of background on yourself and how you got introduced to the world of remote viewing?
Sure. Well, things have been happening in my life, from a very early age. And remote viewing was kind of part of my exploration of trying to figure out what was going on. Um, so I actually bumped into it the first time at a school where I was doing blindfolded work, blindfolded archery and things like that. Um, where we were just focusing on disciplines that taught you the mind is capable of more than we typically think it is. And so I did a remote view there, not knowing really what it was, at the time at all. And we would do simple sending and receiving, where a person, you get to know a person. This is what they call entangling with a person. So you have a higher chance of being able to send and receive. These were all just very experimental, right? And you would think of an image and try to project it to the person, and they would try to perceive it. And, I was okay at that. And then they did this really fascinating test with us, which was a future remote view. And all it was, to kind of describe this, this was just a mind-blowing thing. Um, the day we arrived, I'm just going to break it down in a 7-day cycle. How this works is the day you arrive, they tell you we're going to do a remote view. And we are not going to choose the target or even pick the person who's going to choose the target for 7 days. But you're going to remote view it today based on like a symbol that has an intent loaded into it, like an X. Okay, it was something really simple. It was not like we typically hear about controlled remote viewing with a target number. This was very simple. And we didn't follow any protocols, and they just said, just, draw anything that comes to your mind. Just quiet your mind after we give you this, silence, and just draw anything that comes to your mind, color it if you want to. So we had these little cards that we fitted on, and I drew these different things. And then one of the things I drew was this sun. So, but I drew it in a certain way, yellow circle, colored it with the sort of sun rays coming out, the equidistant sun rays. So, not really understanding what was going on, you submit the card, everybody does. And, there's 600 people doing this. And then 7 days later, they choose a person out of a hat, like, out of a box of names kinda thing. And, that person then goes and chooses what the target will be that we already remote viewed and reveal it. So, this reveal now, not knowing as much as I know now about remote viewing, I did not think this was a hit. But so someone had pulled out of a box 7 days later this little ceramic daffodil, and I thought yellow daffodil, and I thought, "Oh, I didn't get that," you know? But you learn in remote viewing that it's about describing the parts. We're more accurate at that, describing the parts. So this would be a yellow spherical object with equidistant pieces coming from it. And I then realized that this was a hit, And, so you could safely say I got hooked, you know?
Well, yeah.
I
With
don't
results like that on the first time.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I got misses as well, some of the other things that I put on there were misses. But, I mean, that's why we were there to be amazed by what we ourselves could do, because it's people can talk all they want about remote viewing and say how great it is, but, it really falls to us to try it and see, is it true or not? And enough people have done it. When you dig into the research, there's solid research there to show that this is a real thing and many people can do it. And it has been tracked. It is done, was done in labs, at Stanford Research Center. They created protocols, they tracked it, and when it went into the military with Project Stargate and the, the previous names it was called, they spent a lot of time tracking the results for good reason. In the military, they wanna know, like, what are certain people good at? Some people are good at colors, some people are good at dimensions, some people are good at people, and, having a team together that has all these different specialties, you can see would be better and more efficient for actionable intelligence to say, find someone. You kind of need all of those skills. Yeah, I mean, you have the superstars, the Pat Prices and the Joe McMoneagle and Ingo Swann that probably could do the whole thing, right? But there is solid research out there to show that this is a real, discipline. But I understand the skeptics because it does sound crazy that we can do this, but I think that it's a very what we find is that it's very natural in us. It's just our minds are designed to be focused on survival. That's an evolutionary trait, to survive. So they're just not focused on uh, this deeper undercurrent of information. But if you can create a setting, as a lot of the teachers of remote viewing do, where the student is comfortable, relaxed, and just sort of open to the possibility, people will be amazed by their own mind. And I mean, that's the whole reason why I even do these interviews and talk about this is because it's it's really a matter of where we're placing our attention. So the whole world has us going in a different direction. But if there is something underneath that is driving us to look deeper, or a restlessness in us that feels like we're not complete in some way, this is one of the most fascinating, meaningful, fulfilling things that we can learn about our true nature and who we really are. It makes you feel less alone in the universe. It opens up all the doors of possibility for the afterlife, and, everything that is beyond this sort of ego mind's perception of reality and what we've always placed importance on. So I bumped in now to get back to your question. I bumped into remote viewing because I was trying to figure out why I was having the things I was having, like I was having precognitive visions. I don't like to use that word very often. I like to call them overlays because, you know, when that happens, I'm aware of this reality and it's something that overlays on top that has information. So to me, that's just a more accurate description. But I needed to understand why these spontaneous things were happening and coming true. Like one of my biggest ones was my father, uh, who was perfectly healthy. I had one of these overlays, and he was basically smiling at me in this particular way, but I everything in me knew this was goodbye. And it to make a long story short, a couple months later, he went from 100 to 0 with pancreatic cancer that had no symptoms. So that's what I'm saying. Like, some people are having this type of precognitive situation, could be dream or vision or whatever. And they just, you can either just sort of ignore it, or you kind of lean in and you try to dig in and figure out what's going on. So for me, I wanted to dig into anything related to the mind that could teach me about me. And so remote viewing is one of many modalities that people can try to learn more about the true nature of their mind. So, I did just about every modality out there because I wanted to know, what are we designed for? What are we really designed for? I think that was the question that was always kind of plaguing me. If these things are happening spontaneously, and not just to me, to everyone, I think it's just that I'm focusing on it. And I got grabbed by the question, who are we really? Why is this happening? I need to know. I can't let it go. I think that's really the difference between me sometimes and people. There's a question that occurs in your life. It could be about business, could be about anything, and it grabs a hold and you can't let go. And this is how I felt, because the whole world was basically saying these things don't exist, but something in me they were happening spontaneously. And so I I wondered if there was anything wrong with me. And then when I was convinced through academia and psychology and all my background that I was fine, um I needed to know, like, what are we denying here? It's kind of weird when I talk about it this way, because I always, being married to my husband Richard, that's what grabbed him about UAPs. He was a professional historian doing his thing, but then he ran into this secrecy and he thought, I need to know the answer to this question. And I feel this way about the true nature of our minds. And then there's a huge overlap, of course, with the mind. But how can we not know that we are extraordinary underneath this? And we are connected, and we are more fascinating than I ever expected, when I was on this journey. And now with things like the telepathy tapes, all based on, Diane Hennessy Powell's incredible work on autistic savants and finding out that they're telepathic. They're in there. They're telepathic. I mean, this is we we've known some of these things for a while. There've been researchers out there saying these things, but it's just getting more attention now. And I think it's not as stigmatized to talk about this. An example of that, I just did Contact in the Desert, in California, and I've lectured at it for several years. And in the past, I was talking about remote viewing, partially because it was more accepted and safer. Um, but it was always kind of fringe. in the whole UFO world. They have, 60 plus speakers, and remote viewing was this tiny little fringe. But this past year, there's been a flip, and people are really seeing that this is a massive part of this component because, in all of the abduction case studies and contactee reports, they're talking about telepathic information in near death experiences. In almost 100% of them, it is, this telepathic communication. So you have to kind of ask yourself, like Ingo Swann, I always bring this up. He was big on this, asking this question: could this be our true universal language? That we actually have this way more powerful language underneath that doesn't care about your socioeconomic status, doesn't care about where you live, doesn't care about anything. This sort of super highway underneath that we all have, and then we have our man-made languages on top. So could Ingo, wondered, could this be the universal language between us and them? And also, I'll just add in, after death experiences as well, psychic experiences, mediumship experiences. Is it just here? Are we held in this isolation somehow? And all it is, possibly just, as an evolutionary advantage, right? Just to focus here. But we know in hypnosis and different areas, as soon as you take the brain into slower oscillations, out of that beta, high focus talking state, down into alpha and theta and delta, which is sleep, this is where, you can do work in hypnosis where people will attempt to get rid of habits like smoking or, whatever. But and when you do any psychic modalities, when you do remote viewing, it's the first step, right? It's just to relax a little bit and open. So it always had me questioning, is our hyper focused daily beta brainwave state like an isolated state? It's some, because all it takes for any of these things and for people to try it themselves is to just get into these lower states and have an intent of where they want to take their mind and be open enough to notice. Because I would hazard a guess to say everybody has some kind of experience that they just probably aren't focusing on. And one of the easiest places, of course, would be in dreams, but we don't really value them. We get up and we start looking at our phone, and we just kind of dismiss that. But I would guess that um, just about everyone, if they turned their focus, would begin to observe some of these things in themselves, or um, would remember, you know, would remember things that have happened. So it's a long answer to your question.
Very good answer, though.
Thank you. I just think it's a beautiful thing about us, and I can't say enough about it. Um, and it's just one of the several modalities that teaches us more about ourselves and teaches remote viewing. I just want to finish by saying this: remote viewing is really an extraordinary tool to learn about our own symbolic language. I will often, instead of, because when we talk about telepathy, we think about thought to thought, but it's really much more than that. So I sort of call it this deeper symbolic language, for lack of a good term, because for example, when I had that sort of overlay of my father, he didn't say anything. There was no telepathy or anything like that. It was more experiential knowing. So there's this language that's much broader than just thought to thought. So I think it's it's just one of the most exciting things about who we are.
I would agree. It's been an interesting path, particularly working on developing this podcast. I started out really focused on the UFO and UAP side of things, but very quickly I realized that there was this other road to go down, which connected to the psychic phenomena that is so interesting to explore. And I've had a number of people with remote viewing experience on the show. And I feel like that is an avenue that is maybe underexplored, in more mainstream, podcasts and media.
Yeah.
Um, and there's some sort of cultural stigma against it. I feel there's a lot of negativity when you talk about, like you mentioned, psychic mediums and stuff like that. I feel like there's often, um, this kind of like assumption that these people are frauds or, like charlatans. And undoubtedly, there probably are some out there who are,
Mhm.
trying to just make a quick buck or what have you. But when you really take a look and talk to people and look at the research that's been done seriously, you will discover that there are so many interesting cases. And I know that you've studied many of them and presented information about them in your lectures. So can you go through some of the cases that you've worked on related to, ESP and remote viewing, things like that?
Yeah, well, there's so much. Um, so here's a story that comes to mind. This was from, an abduction case study that I took, and I spoke to this gentleman, and I spoke to his brother, his nephew, his nephew's wife, and then I brought Richard in as well, my husband, and, and his wife. We spoke to his wife as well. Um, and, he has this really interesting story that he hadn't talked about before. And, this gentleman, is in his 70s, mid-70s. Um, excellent man, salt of the earth, his whole family. And, he just is not looking for attention. He's never been comfortable telling this story. He was very uncomfortable telling it to us, but he feels like at this age he needs to. This is what's happening, and I want to be a part of capturing these stories of people who they've always felt stigmatized, like you said, and they, because of that attitude in the world, they wonder, are they crazy? But, their whole family comes forward and says, This person is not crazy. They say that because they're afraid of the blowback, right? The reaction. And, but he's just a good example of something very anomalous happening. So in the 1950s, he was in Deer Park, New York. Um, as a young man, I think he was 8. I think he was 8 years old. And, so he's very young. They had moved into a house in the area, a new house, and they I haven't told the story in a while, so I'm just trying to remember all the details. Um, now, when they moved into this house, they were told it was kinda haunted by the people who were already living in it. Because actually what happened, it became a blended family. I think the mom and dad married, so they were moving into this family's house. Um, and, they had said that, there was some paranormal type of stuff and anyhow, so when he was very young, he started, having this voice in his head, in the middle of the night asking him to come outside, in the middle of the night. So and he said, "I can't explain it, but it was like they were pleading to me that they needed me." And so he went out in the middle of the night as an 8-year-old, got out of bed, went down the stairs, crept out of this house through the front door, through the lawn, crossed the street, into the neighbors, in the dark across behind the house into a field where there was he would always be met by this couple that was they were he said they looked young, she was pretty, they were both extremely tall, they always wore gray suits, they had long gray hair, and she would put her arm around him. He would open the door to this pool house that was in the middle of a field, and he would go in. And he said it happened all the time. And, so you think, okay, how do we know this actually was happening and this wasn't a dream, right? Well, his grandparents were staying over one time and they intercepted him leaving at 3 in the morning. And he said this is kind of when he realized something was really happening because the grandfather was like, where do you think you're going? He said, I'm going out. And they said, no, you're not, and he said, yes, I am. They need me. And he said it was the first time because he was so young and confused by this. It was the first time that he realized that only he could hear them and nobody else could hear them. But they had created this bond with him that was so caring that he felt really obligated, and he said they were talking to him while his grandfather was talking, encouraging him that you've gotta, we need you to come. And, so whenever he could, he would go. So we had this confirmation from the whole family about this interception that happened. They all knew about this. Then on the other end, we had, an incident where his mom caught him coming home in the morning, and he never had any memory after when that door opened. So at 8, you could kind of question this. But this went on until he was 14. And we were able to discover the age he was at because of the height he was. We were asking about height. We were able to figure this all out because at the end of this, when he was 14, he was very tall. Everyone in his family is super tall. And he was the same height as the woman. And, then he's really noticing she's attractive. And, like there's little details, but this is a secret his whole family has had his whole life, and they all 100% believe him because he spoke about it while it was happening. He was very confused by this. He didn't know how to talk about it because these people were telling him it had to stay a secret. Um, so and then you could think, okay, were these real people? Well, if they were real people, they're using some kind of telepathic communication, right? But if they're not real people, um, because we have this one interesting tidbit, when he was 14, he was able to tell their appearance had never changed, like not remotely, from 8 to 14. Only he had changed and nothing happened about it. And there was another time where he was walking down the stairs in the middle of the night and he hesitated because it's like he kind of snapped out of it for some reason. All of a sudden, he realized how dark it was and he was really scared. And he said they came right into his head immediately and said, it's okay. You're going to be fine. And then again, he just sort of fell into this, okay, and goes into, far from his home at 3 in the morning. And we asked him, how often did this happen? He said, oh, it was a road well traveled, And by the way, when his mom caught him coming in one time, she said, oh, I've, this used to happen with your dad. She would catch him coming home in his underwear. And so this might be, an intergenerational thing, but let's just be conservative and call it a very curious case. He was very intelligent, by the way. He, after this stopped happening, he felt like less like a gift had been taken away. It was kind of a strange thing, but um, you know, it's it's a tough story for people to swallow. That's why you have to do a lot of research into the person, into their life, into their family, and to establish that you feel they are, of sound mind and you believe them, and that all it's important that all of these other people, it was hard for them to believe what was going on, but they definitely believe this. And in the context of learning all about him, as you find with many people with these types of experiences, there are many their lives are filled with it, you know, filled with it. And they doubt it themselves. He had these experiences as an adult where he was driving and then the car just goes over to the side and this light comes, and he just didn't even think of originally telling us this. He had an experience that he had with his wife, where the two of them were in their bedroom, and suddenly the entire room turned this bright, incredulous blue. And she said, because nothing had ever happened to her, she was just trying to believe her husband. It was tough, but she was trying to believe him. And she said her skin was blue, like everything in the room was saturated blue. And, as sane, rational people, they didn't know what happened, and they tried to recreate this with lights outside the bedroom. They tried everything to try to recreate this global light that filled the room. It wasn't like lights coming in, but they tried it anyhow, and they were unable to get to anything even close to that. So his whole life was actually filled with things like that. And then you also, I interviewed his daughter, and his daughter has some extraordinary experiences as well. Um, that one I can't remember all the details off the top of my head, so I don't want to attempt that one. But she had reported this experience in her home, and the very same night, he was working the night shift at an airport, and that very same night that she thought she had, beings come into the home, he said something was seen at the airport. It was reported in the paper, and the whole airport was on alert because they thought it was a UFO. This was in Orlando, Florida, and we were able to find the, newspaper article to, corroborate this, that something had happened that night. Um, so I'm probably forgetting a whole bunch of details because I haven't told it in a while. But so his story is, he felt so alone and isolated in this story, and thinking he was crazy because that's what the world tells him, you know. But the thing is, when you start opening this dialogue for people and it's safe, and more and more people are interested in these topics now. Um, More and more people start to be willing to come forward. And, I can just say I've experienced myself, you get a few of these, but then when people know you are going to do your best to understand and listen, um, and investigate it for them, then you get a whole bunch of people coming forward because it's safe. And, you know, I was really kind of focused on seniors because for one reason, I'm worried that their stories are going to go untold. And for them, the stigma was the greatest, you know? Um, so I'm kind of really focused on this generation, those generations. Um, because when you open that door, the stories that they have been hiding or just not felt comfortable coming forward with are extraordinary. They're mind-blowing, and they are proof times 100. Um, like, he's one story I'm telling you, and people can choose to believe that or not. But that's one of hundreds of stories like that where, this type of thing is happening. There it becomes clear that we're like the babies, the kindergarten class, and these other beings of a greater intelligence, whoever they are, you know, um, who have greater mastership over our minds than we do, have been communicating and interacting with us for a long time in many different ways. And so the only way that we are going to discover or even come close to figuring out what's really going on is to at least create an opening where we can archive and record these really important things that are happening to people or have happened to people. There needs to be a safe archival kind of situation, at the very least, for us to really learn what the big groups, and whether that's ET, whether that's like in the realms of afterlife, it's probably all the same. We could never say for sure. We could never say for sure exactly what it is, but we can do our best to gather the research and create a situation where we're listening to these people, we're listening to their stories, and we're trying to get as much detail as we can. Because I don't think a lot of them don't want to die with this in them either. They've just not been given a chance to tell these things, and some of them, it hasn't occurred to them. But, um, this is becoming more mainstream, now with Dr. Diane Hennessy Powell, the telepathy tapes, New York Times article, UAP is coming into the news so much more with Senate hearings, or sorry, congressional hearings. Um, they're there, and now they're wondering, who do I tell? Who do I tell? And that's another problem that we have with this whole area, is we don't have a central bank of this information, right? It's kind of separated into all these different areas, and even parts of UFO still don't, or UAP still don't recognize the telepathic component
Right.
completely. Um, it's kind of and it's no surprise that it's like that. Everyone's just, you've got individual researchers all over the place doing their best to pull it in. And you've got a couple of organizations, right, like MUFON and New Fork, doing their best to take it in. But all of these areas are kind of typically underfunded, solitary people working on it and doing their best. And it's just uh it's just too bad we haven't figured out a way to um truly archive it in a place that's neutral. And like, just imagine us in 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and we are, I would guess, because of AI and everything else, whole new worlds are going to be open up to us, right? And we might be really, really interested in this particular time where it was just cracking through. This might end up being the most incredible cusp of humanity ever in this time. And so that's part of what drives me to want to hear these stories and to pull those people out of the woodwork that have been kind of hiding, and, they're not comfortable. It's like, I'm just one person, and my husband's just one person. And all of the other researchers, and, we're not enough. We're not enough to pull these in, because you have to take, like I was saying earlier, you have to take hours and hours and hours, really, truly, to be able to answer some of these questions, like, are they looking for attention? Are they, like, you kind of got to work your way through a lot of questions that skeptics have, right? Like, are they just trying to make money off this? They just, we've all heard it all. And, but you can quickly see, when you take all those things out, there is still this undeniable core there. And the other thing is, sometimes another unfortunate thing is, family members of the skeptic are hiding things. If you have someone in your family that is actively against this, that's even just the possibility, that's going to probably shut it down in you, you know? Um, which is fine. But I think when people reach a certain age, they don't care anymore. They don't care anymore. They're thinking about their kids. They're thinking about their kids' kids. And they're like, what do I need to do to just let them know there might be a little bit more, or maybe let them know about this story? And I just think we're going to be surprised by the next few decades. I don't even think we can fathom where we're heading with all of this, with AI and everything else. I don't even know. But I do think this is going to be the most incredible time where the cracks started. And we will see, I think, in the next couple of years, more and more people coming forward with these unbelievable stories of contact, ESP experiences. And, I think another thing that I try to do, because you were asking me about my lecture, um, is I try to use stories that are kind of more gentle. We don't have to go right to remote viewing or to contactees, abductees. We don't even have to go there. We can just look at our own lives and look at precognitive experiences, lucid dreams, out of body experiences. These seem to be a more friendly way for just about the general public to enter into this, especially with near death experiences, right? Like that is something that is incredible. It's been studied. Doctors have studied it. They're fascinated by it. It's a thing, it's an anomalous thing that they can't explain, but they know is happening. There've been a lot of studies on that. So, um, and you have people looking at their dreams, precognitive dreams, um, just random things that have happened in their lives, and they just write them off. So I'm going to give another example of something kind of interesting that happened one time, just popped up. So one of the schools of mine that I went to was the Monroe Institute. I did a lot there. Because same reason, just exploring who the heck are we really? Why do we have occasional, intuitions that are so strong and they come true? Why does that happen? And so I did several residential programs there, which were extraordinary. And for people who don't really know about the Monroe Institute, I know there's a lot, people are starting to. This was a long time ago where you had to give your phone away for the week. People probably can't even imagine that
God
now.
forbid. What a
Yeah, yeah.
nightmare.
Yeah, so and I mean, we didn't have laptops, right? It was, so it was good though, because you are suspending the rest of the world and focusing on this for a week. And I kind of lightheartedly say it's like a modern day shamanic retreat in comfort.
Mhm.
So, you will do, audio assisted technology that is known to help people get into altered states. And uh, it is a wonderful thing. So when I did my very first gateway experience, it was a year that they were doing it in at Ions in Petaluma in California. I don't know how that might have been the only time they ever did that, but they did. And it was one of the very first sessions. And you just want to do what you're told, so you learn. So you go into your own room at the Monroe Institute. They have what's called check units. They're like little your bed is in an isolation kind of booth. But at this place, you had your own room at Ions, and you had in mine, I had a window to the outside. And so you go into the room, you're told a little bit about what's going to happen, and you listen to an audio guided sort of, they don't use the word meditation, but it's like a meditation. And you just listen and do what it says. And so I go in there and I lie down, and I'm trying to pay attention to what it's saying. There's a bit of an induction, like hypnosis, but they use different techniques, humming and some different things. And immediately I start seeing something outside the window that I know is an overlay. You know, it can't be real. And I see this Asian woman, beautiful, and she looks sad and she's looking in the window, and I'm trying to focus on what's going on. I don't know why this is happening. This is just happening. And then I see these two young children climbing up this hill in the grass, a little boy and a little girl, really young in my mind, but clear, really clearly. And I don't know what to do with it. I'm just noticing and still trying to do what the instructions are telling me to do. So I, you know, the week goes on. Uh, I don't say anything about this. And there was a moment where we were doing an exercise at night. We were doing a remote view. And at this time, I had already been trained and I got this remote view right. And so a lot of people wanted to stay after and talk. And I was happy to, because I'm just curious myself why this happens. And so I had this group there and they were asking, how do you do this? What was the training like? And why do you think this happens? Why do you think you got it right? And I said, I don't know. Sometimes I do and sometimes I don't. I have no idea. Sometimes I have things that I see and I don't know why. And I said, like this experience. And I told them about this thing I just told you about. And this man steps forward who was Asian and said, um, could you tell me more about that? Um, could you tell me, could you describe the children more? And I said, yeah, it was a boy and a girl. And he said, how old do you think they were? And I said, I thought they were like 5, 6, 7, 8, like somewhere in that age. They were young, but I didn't get to see their faces forward because they were crawling up this hill in the grass slowly. And it's really strange, right? But again, really clear. And he said, I got in a car accident at the bottom of this hill, and my wife and 2 children died. And I said, I, I don't think they were your children. And he said, why not? And I said, because they were Caucasian, actually. He said, my children were Caucasian. And so, you know, this taught me a lot. It taught me, first of all, this has to be a part of us for a reason. You know, this this has to be a part of us for a reason. And I think it's important that we stop denying this. We don't have to do anything about it. We don't have to tell other people, but I think it's time we start acknowledging some of these things, because what if you're denying incredible healing of other people? Like this. These are the questions that this left me with. This was an incredible moment, and we took it a little farther after that too, where I tried to communicate with her for him and get a piece of information that only he would know. And it worked. We did something. And I can't say that's something I do all the time or know how to do. No, it was just going with a moment of someone who was hurting so deeply. I wasn't trying to impress this person. I didn't even know this person on the first day. But it just taught me not to ignore these things. And so we, when you really start to focus your attention on this for yourself, you start to pay attention to your dreams. You start to tell yourself, this is important to me. If this is a part of me, I want to know more. if it's happening in my dreams, I want to remember my dreams. And I'm going to make time in the morning and remember, because if there's really information there, I want to know. And we can take moments, even if we can't meditate, take moments where you at least open up a little bit of silence, could be listening to music or whatever. But once we start looking, we see, I can confidently say this, speaking from my own experience about my own life. When I began to accept it more, there were incredible opportunities for myself to navigate my own life. But there was this incredible opportunity. So with my father, I was able to be there for the rest of my family. This was so shocking to us, but I was able to be there for the rest of my family and sort of centrally um, manage the shock and pain very well, because I felt something in that experience with him had brought peace and just a knowingness. And so I was able to help others. I believe that it helps us. It is there, and it helps us navigate, if we want it. Like, let me say it this way. I think there is a way more intelligent, expanded part of ourselves that we have access to all the time, that is there to navigate life on a deeply intuitive level if we want it. And it has benefits of helping other people, helping our family, helping us navigate things. Um, and, it doesn't, for me, it's not like it happens all the time. It just happens, it seems, when it's most needed, you know? And I think that's what we can expect from it, that it's always there when it's most needed. Even, you know, um, cops, right? They have that strong gut instinct, but they may reject all of this. And I get that, right? Pat Price, one of the most famous psychics in the world in the remote viewing world, he was a policeman, and he was very good at getting information because he had this deep gut experience when he would focus on these people, and he was able to get actionable information. He didn't know how, but once you start having it, you focus on it, and it sort of grows, right? So I think that it's there. It's available. I just in the last day, I was thinking of this, like, it's almost like it's a super highway of information where these expanded versions of us can reach out to each other. That expanded version knows that it's connected to everything, but is also guiding you not to go down this path. Here's another example, with 9/11 and train crashes. Uh, there was a study done of train crashes, for example, and they found that it was the lowest uh, amount of tickets claimed on the day of a train crash, even accounting for the worst weather days where you think people would cancel their tickets. This was way lower for every major train crash that they studied. Something in these people it would seem, was guiding them not to go. And I have not investigated this myself, that there are stories from survivors of 9/11 like this. I want to dig into that. I actually can't wait to have a look at that.
That
What
they were
were
about to get on a plane and then they decided not to. And
they decided not to, but they may have been, the one of many. So all of these people were perceiving something. Some part of them was perceiving something, and they did not go for whatever reason. And I think that is, some incredible proof that we're all connected in. And why some of them went, I mean, we will never know. I don't know. But if the majority of them didn't, that's interesting, you know? And even with the Global Consciousness Project, with the random number generators around the world, right? Where before 9/11, they could see that something in the like something was showing up in their random number generators. Show like 12 hours before 9/11 happened, there were these indicators that some part of us already knew something was going on because all the numbers started lining up. Um, and then there are pre-sentiment studies where they'll hook people up to this machine. I can't, I don't even have the specifics, but I've read about this many times and heard about this. In pre-sentiment studies, basically what's happening is, say they've got you watching images changing, and they're all normal, positive images. But because your skin responses, galvanic responses, I believe, are hooked up, um, something in you reacts before you see a horrific image. So there's something there as well that is showing us we have this greater part of ourselves that is connected to more information. So it isn't something that we should be um, fearing. I don't believe. I think all of the fear that's out there is from a long time ago, and I think, some of it comes from some parts of religion, and because one thing about religion, I have nothing against religion, but it makes people feel safe, right? It creates a framework, and religion's not the only thing. There's lots of belief systems that make us feel very safe. And for some people, um, entering into this world of more, an expanded version of us, um, makes people uncomfortable because it then kind of blows the framework. Everything is like then now there's unknowns in that framework. And I think understandably that's uncomfortable for a lot of people. But if we can all help to normalize this by even focusing on our own personal stories, we don't even have to go to remote viewing. Remote viewing is wonderful, though, because it was created in the lab. It was created with specific protocols to see if ESP was repeatable at will. And it is, it is. Um, so it's great validation of something that we have suspected is going on with us all this time. But we don't even need to go that far. We just need to look a little deeper at our normal lives and what's showing through in our dreams, and where we sometimes make those little navigation choices that were completely intuitive. They're there. They're there in everybody. And I have found, going to family gatherings, because my family's kind of thought I was crazy with all this stuff, Um, but I just couldn't let it go, right? I just had to know. And so I learned quickly that talking about dreams, and near death experiences is a nice way to open the dialogue that feels safe for people. And so when I was at university, and I wanted to talk about this all the time, but I couldn't, I would drop these little seeds whenever I would introduce myself. I just, that I study dreams and this and that. And what I expected always happened. A group of, because I was in university when I was, well, in multiple times, but when I was older and went back as a mature student, um, this several 20-year-olds would be waiting outside the classroom, and they wanted to share their anomalous experiences. They have been dying to, and the thing you hear all the time is, "I've never told anybody this." It's a thing you hear the most. Um, People are wanting to talk about this, and then I actually started a couple of organizations at the university I was at, as a mature student, and, one of them, the second one I did was, basically in a I called it a kinda like a dream group, but it was much more, I put dreams out of body, whatever, and I just basically was opening up a space for, um, students to discuss anything they wanted to about what was going on that was unusual because they came from all different backgrounds, religious or not, or, and it was one of the fastest growing clubs in the university. And it it was clear to me, it doesn't matter what generation it is, people are wanting to talk about this. They want to do this, and it was, um, it was set for an hour, and we would be there for 5 hours because I just didn't wanna stop because they didn't wanna stop. They just wanted to know, and, I was never telling them they were right or wrong, I was just giving them a place that we could discuss it, and people could share their stories, and that's never left me either. That's that's what's so great about podcasts like yours, where you're asking questions like this and digging into things like this, because I think the audience is expanding and they are coming to a place where they are remembering some of the things that have happened to them and they want more information. And one of the best things you can do for yourself, if you're having some of these experiences and it's uncomfortable, is to get more information, to learn more, to hear people's stories. I will just say people who have been confronting this themselves for their whole lives, like that's my situation. I've learned a lot, and I've tried a lot of things, been to many different schools. And I've said this before, but it's true. I'm not an extremist in any way. I don't go into a school of mind and go full on into that. I always try to come back to center and pull the wisdom from every single teaching and then walk my life as feels comfortable for me, but now with this new information on every side, right? And I do believe what that does, it creates a deeper spiritual center for us. It creates more resiliency to navigate all of the uncertainties that are coming in regular life, like AI and everything else. I think that knowing that we are so much more than we typically associate with is one of the best things that we can do for ourselves. Even just listening to other people's stories, even just going into near-death experiences. If all of this is uncomfortable for people, that's a really great place to go. But it's a wonderful thing, that we have people like you who are opening these dialogues and giving space for us to explore who we really are and, to acknowledge that together, we are so much more. And what if they, more intelligent beings than us, are waiting for this? What if what if this is why? Um, Maybe it's been hinted at us all along, like the, Temple of Apollo at Delphi that said, "Know thyself." I mean, we just kinda throw that around these days, but if we really think about that, I mean, what was that? What were they always saying? We are the key. The key is in us. So what is that key? I would hazard to say, could it be this? Could it be that we until we recognize that we have this grand, extraordinary, interconnected part of ourselves, we're gonna stay at this level, And if there was no other reason, what if, we're so digitally dependent at this time, right? What if there was a massive solar flare that we know can take out electronics? Um, we're so dependent that would leave us with nothing. And what if that happened and there was another event that complicated this, like like an earthquake or something? How would we communicate with our loved ones? How would we find each other? And I think this this world of ESP, or I will just call it simply expanded perception, gives us access to this innate way that we could find each other. And even if we don't spend our lives trying to open that up, I think in a situation like that, just being open enough to have the belief that you just might have that inside you, where you could find your loved ones if you just don't freak out and you question, could I really be this? What if I had this all along? And so I think that's a good reason for us to at least consider this. We might need it someday. Yeah.
Hopefully not, but it's nice to know that
Hopefully not.
the potential is there, and I would agree with you that I think the biggest change to me is the amount of conversations that are happening publicly, which is inviting for people to learn more and also feel more comfortable sharing their own experiences. And so that's what I'm all about, because this is just, I think it's too interesting to ignore. And anybody who is noticing these things in themselves, please take note. Don't give up on it. Delve further into it, because there's meaning behind it, clearly. And I've seen a huge amount of appreciation for the work that you do and the work that your husband Richard does, who, by the way, I've had on the show. We had a great conversation
Yeah.
too on the UFO side of things. I'd love to delve more into the connections between those two worlds. Maybe we can save that for a future episode.
Mhm. Sure.
But just in closing, what is one piece of advice that you would give to somebody who is noticing things like this in their own lives, noticing whether it's precognitive stuff or just, things that they're not sure, is this a coincidence or is this something more?
Mhm.
What would be a recommendation that you could give on how to develop that and further embrace it?
Okay, well, the absolute number one thing that is necessary, in my opinion, is to write it down. So, I know that sounds so simple, but you want a record of these things, and if you are just, you can't do that, voice record it. Everybody's got a phone, voice record it. Get it down somehow. Because when precognitive dreams happen, a lot of times, especially when people aren't expecting it, you don't know when a dream is going to be precognitive, right? So the more you get them down, the more you'll be able to convince yourself. Because even when you have these things happen, like what I was, describing about myself with remote viewing, um, after time passes, you still start to doubt it. You still start to doubt. It's because we're taught to, so writing it down is the most important thing that people can do to prove to themselves what's really happening. Another thing is get a framework. So look for I would suggest look into any research that interests you the most. So if it's remote viewing or it's, a psychic modality or near death experiences. If it's near death experiences, you could interview people. You could look at the studies. But I do recommend that people do a modality themselves, because then you can't deny when you start seeing, oh, I'm getting some of these things right and it was out of infinite possibilities. How is that possible? So like remote viewing, for example, is great because when you start, they'll have like a picture hidden in an envelope, right? And you will write what you're getting on a piece of paper. And then when it's over, you have this incredible comparison you can do. It's like, okay, I can learn from this. My mind was perceiving the colors. My mind was perceiving there was a repeating pattern, but it was really having trouble figuring out this part, you know? So doing this particular modality, because it has protocols, has this really great way of um, helping you see the language of your mind on paper. So that's just one reason why you might choose remote viewing. But any of it is going to teach you that you have to kind of relax and get into a state. For some people, the best thing you could do if none of that resonates is just start creating quiet space. So, if you want to attempt meditation, I could talk about that all day. I've been meditating for 20 years, but that's not for everybody. But for some people, it is. And same thing, you're just practicing having space where you have no thoughts so that things can emerge. And sometimes it's nothing metaphysical. It might be something like an insight of something you need in your life for work, or a memory you were hunting for that's really important. When you create that space, you are giving your mind a break to bring these things to you and then write it down. And then the last thing I just want to say, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but so much happens in the night for people. I could talk about this all day. Um, but if you just get up and get on your phone and start looking at your inbox of all the things that people need from you, you're not giving yourself a chance to learn the wisdom that is coming in the night. Like, don't get me wrong, there's a mishmash of the day in our dreams as well, where we're just processing things. But you can't convince me from all the things that have happened to me and all the people that I've studied that there isn't something else going on in our dreams. I mean, people get information that comes true, in their dreams. So it's really important. And this is one of the easiest ways where you don't have to pay anything. You don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to learn how to do anything. You just have to get a journal and you just have to, take some time when you wake up and write anything, date it and write anything that you can remember. And because what you're doing is you're teaching and instructing your daytime psyche that it is important to you what's happening in the night. It's attention management, right? You want to see, you want to know because you believe there's a possibility that there's wisdom in there. If people are having precognitive dreams that come true, you want them too. And so you have to do that kind of handshake in the morning between the day and the night. And so what I will do is I will get up and I will put on hemisync. I'll just put on a little bit of music. It doesn't have to be hemisync. It could just be music that's very relaxing. It doesn't have words. That's important to give the mind space and just have that no thought time. And if you can't, just work up to it and just expect yourself to do a minute, two. And what you find is, surprisingly, you want a couple more minutes and you want a couple more minutes. And then when you start noticing a dream that you wrote down that seemed really mundane, ends up coming true. You're hooked. And you know for yourself that something more is going on. And then once you start seeing this, it's very important to learn as much as you can. Build more frameworks so that your psyche, which is focused on survival, feels safe. That's all. That would be my best advice.
That's great advice, Tracey. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Where can people learn more about your work?
Well, I don't have, honestly, I'm not online that much. But hopefully in the coming months, I will be. Uh, they can always go to Richard Dolan members and they can go through Contact Us. I'm sometimes doing podcasts with Richard. We have some that are behind a paywall and some that are free. We'll be doing more of that soon. We're moving right now, so we're a little off email. We do our best to keep up with email, but please know we are chronically behind. And I do have social media. I don't go on it a lot, just full disclosure here, but it's Tracey Garbutt Dolan for Instagram and Facebook. But forgive me for I don't actually go on there that much, but that is where I am. So
All right. Well, I will provide links to all of those in the description for this video. And also, please check out the film that I mentioned at the beginning of the show, Psychics and the Phenomenon. Tracey features in that movie. It's great. It's a great watch. It explains a lot about remote viewing and other psi phenomena, which is super fascinating. And to everybody, just as an additional reminder, um, Unveiled is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, you name it. We're there, all the podcast platforms. So please check us out. Link for that will be in the description too. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe and like. All of that stuff helps us out to keep bringing you the top guests in the fields of UFOs, remote viewing, and all of those fun topics that we love to discuss here. So until next time, thanks a lot and take care, Tracey. It was great speaking with you.
thank you so much. Total pleasure.